I'll call this meeting of the Lake Mills Area School District Board to order. And our mission statement is the Lake Mills Area School District is preparing all of today's students for tomorrow's opportunities. Has the meeting been posted, Dr. Olson?
Yes, it was posted on the LMASD website and at the Lake Mills Post Office and submitted to the Lake Mills Leader.
Okay, then with that, I will officially call this meeting to order. If all are able, for those able in attendance, please rise to join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I request a roll call meeting for attendance.
Brianna Beselick.
Here.
Ken Imers.
Here.
Andrea Graham. Here. Kirk Lund.
Here.
Amy Litcher.
Here. The next action is any revisions to the agenda.
I suggest that we take the board workshop minutes from last week, I think, out of the closed session since it was an open session and just move it into the consent agenda for approval.
All right, that was probably my mistake. Oops.
Just the attachment.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I just want to clarify, Brianna, so which,
So under executive session, you have the board workshop session minutes under there from when we heard from all of the principals on their mid-year goals. And since that was an open session workshop, I think that it should probably be approved in a regular meeting. I could be wrong.
Actually, it looks like it is in the consent agenda, D, 5D.
Is it there too?
There.
Okay.
I just opened it under
Double.
the executive
Yeah.
session and thought, ooh, I don't think that should be there.
Okay, then
So
would
we don't need to.
Yes,
yeah,
it's in both places, you're right.
then a friendly amendment to not do it and just remove it from the post?
I'll recall my amendment.
Okay. With that,
it's just,
then, are there any other proposed revisions to the agenda? Hearing none, we will move on to board reports, and we look forward to hearing those who attended at the state convention in January, information on what they learned.
Sure, I'll start. I was very appreciative to be able to go again. This is definitely something that I think I look forward to every year. So it was great to kind of connect and network with people I had from previous lives and then kind of meet and connect with new school board members and administrators from across Wisconsin. So I'll start with the delegate assembly because that was one of my jobs while I was there. And we did not finish. I think it was a first. So I was speaking to a gentleman at the breakfast the next morning, and I had asked him, who had attended several times, I said, is this a typical thing? And he said, no, not at all. And I said, well, approximately how many resolutions do you usually see in a year? And he said, usually 10 to 12. So this year, we got through 16, and by resolution 17, we ran out of a quorum. People were leaving. So out of those 16, we had 15 resolutions that had passed. If you saw the WASB email come through, you could see those resolutions that did pass. Several of them had amendments, but they were just literally kind of a letter, an S at the end, very simple changes. So we'll see what next year brings, if they bring back the rest of those or what happens. So that was the delegate assembly. That was very different than my first year. Some of the other sessions that I went to were always interesting, and I feel like they always have so much to choose from, which is great. Some of the things that I chose to go to were about referendums, voter satisfaction, and one of the big takeaways from those was just being really adamant about telling our story. Because if we don't tell our story and we don't give, our facts and our numbers, then there will be somebody else who tells our story for us. So it's really important to share what is actually going on within our district from the standpoint of we want to educate people as to what we actually have going on. One of the other ones that I went to was about taking the time to really build through, like we did with our strategic plan, but more of a curriculum end of it, and making sure that, if your district is looking into various changes within their curriculum, taking the time to really think through and understanding the different parts, because sometimes I think people feel rushed to get something better in the door, but there was one district who literally had a 3-year process, so it was really interesting to hear how they did that in taking the time to do that. Let me see. I also went to a financial one, which is, of course, always interesting and fun to hear about. So Chasha has shared some good info from that with the video she created, but it's always good to hear those. I think each time I pick up something a little bit different and look at it from a different lens, and so that's always good information to know, and then again, tell our story to the public and how that applies to us and what we're doing here and what we're seeing. So I would say overall, this is such an enjoyment. You leave there feeling so rejuvenated and refreshed and energetic and ready to kind of conquer the world. So it was also great to see districts with all of their boards present, and so they had a time to connect and really bounce ideas at the moment off of each other. And I know that's not always possible, but that was kind of cool to see them communicate and collaborate with each other as well throughout the weekend. Well, it was before the weekend, the early weekend. So, yeah.
Yeah, I had the same experience in terms of, I thought the diversity of the offerings for seminars was much deeper, and I remember a couple hours I had 4 checked that I wanted to go to, and had to choose one. And I think the people's credit around the state, they put a lot of effort into those presentations. Mm-hmm. And you could tell it. And what's really interesting is just hearing, again, networking, hearing the different ways districts approach things. Not every district's the same. That was, and actually, I think this year, it seemed to me they allowed more time to, when there was a presentation, and then you'd have a break where the table would talk. And I think they did more of that this year. That was kind of helpful. And I did attend the a few fiscal seminars, and I think a little more of it stuck in my head this time each year, just a little more. But it was just a great experience, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed going to this convention. I'd never been to it before, first time. The music was fantastic. They had different high school groups performing. They had a band, an orchestra, and a choir. I really enjoyed that in the main sessions. There was a documentary film that was shown called The Truth About Reading, and had just some incredible stories of, the purpose was to, shine a spotlight on a national problem of, students up through high school and even graduating that are not learning to read either at all or even at their grade level. And they had some incredible stories of, entrepreneurs, people who were in their 40s, 50s, had made millions of dollars and couldn't read. And their story about deciding to learn to read. And also there's stories about how they navigated life without being able to read and found an alternative route to success. It was just a fascinating documentary. I highly recommend it. Also attended a workshop called Inclusive School Board Leadership, and we had some really good conversations and exercises. One of the ones I want to highlight was teaching us the difference between deficit-minded, diversity-minded, and equity-minded. And they had some examples. I'll just read you the definitions here. Deficit-minded students are considered deficient. Race or ethnicity is implied but not named. Diversity-minded would be diverse and equal representation is emphasized without any one group being specifically or intentionally targeted. And then equity-minded is specific racial, ethnic groups experiencing gaps in access or outcomes are specifically named and focused on. I think about this in terms of like treating people all the same isn't necessarily equitable or fair. That if you don't recognize that people start in different places and have different experiences and different obstacles and difficulties, that if you just treat everybody the same, you're really treating people unfairly. Finding ways to treat people differently but fairly. I'll just read one example here of each of these. They gave us a situation we were supposed to decide if it's deficit-minded, diversity-minded, or equity-minded. And one is, I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make it drink. And that would be an example of deficit-minded. I think about our recent change from English language learner or English learner to multilingual learner, and not focusing, as they presented it, not focusing on the deficit, but focusing on the positives and the capabilities of students. As an example of, just to give one of each, if we look at all the data together, we will be able to see specifically where students are strong and where we can take specific steps to help them succeed. And they have that as equity-minded because you're looking at each individual and their differences and different struggles, and then treating them differently but fairly based on that criteria. And then highlight one thing that I saw in the exhibit hall that I thought was fascinating. It's called the anatomage table, and they've got images of 4 people who donated their body to science when they died, and it's billed as a substitute to working on a cadaver. Obviously in secondary school you won't be working on a cadaver, but you have students who are interested in medicine as a career, and they're able on this table to electronically isolate different systems of the body, and it just looked to be a fascinating device. And they highlighted that the company would help you find grants to pay for it. So I thought that was really interesting. So looking forward to attending the convention next year.
Super. All right. Thank you to those who were able to attend and brought back a lot of good information. And thank you. We look forward to discussions based on that. So thank you. On to Ken Eimers, Clerk Correspondence.
Sure. Jessica Noche, our multilingual learner program coordinator, had sent a thank you note to the district. And really it's relating to the district sending a peace lily to the Steffens family for Judy Steffens having passed away. And our district said thank you, or the Steffens family had said thank you for the peace lily. And then Jessica sent a note saying, "I'm so thankful to work in such a supportive district. Love, Jessica Noche." So that was a real nice kind of thing.
If there's nothing else under board reports, we'll move on to administrative reports, and we'll go to Ms. Naylor.
Good evening, thank you. So to start out tonight for my report, I'd like to have everyone view the video I had prepared telling our financial story. So it's about a 15-minute video, so we can start with that.
Hello, my name is Tasha Naylor, Director of Business Services for the Lake Mills Area School District. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, as I believe it is important for all of us as educators and citizens of Wisconsin to be aware of the recent funding trends in Wisconsin public schools. In this video, I will provide a brief overview of how public schools in Wisconsin are funded, Wisconsin public school funding trends, Lake Mills Area School District's current financial picture, as well as the future financial outlook for Lake Mills Area School District. Where does district funding come from? Public school funding can be very complicated, but in general, the majority of its funding comes from our 3-year resident pupil average multiplied by a dollar amount per pupil. This calculation determines our total revenue limit that we have to work with for the school year. This limit can only be exceeded through a successful referendum. The dollar amount we receive per student is determined by our state legislator, typically through the biennial state process. After our total revenue limit is determined, the amount is split between state aid and our district residents via the property tax payments. The majority of our annual operating costs are funded through our general operating fund, Fund 10. The majority that makes up the revenue is determined by the revenue limit and includes the local property taxes and state aid portions. For Lake Mills, as you can see, the purple slice of the revenue pie represents the 54% of our funding is through the state general aid, and 36% is through property taxes, represented in blue. In addition to the revenue limit, the district also receives funds through federal grants, student registration fees, and other miscellaneous revenue sources. These are represented in the teal and red slices. Shifting over to the expenditures, the majority of the General Fund 10 operating expenses are used for salary and benefits. The next highest expense categories are purchase services, represented in green, and the transfer to special education, Fund 27, represented in dark red. School districts have other funds besides Fund 10. LMASD uses funds in all of these categories listed. The Department of Public Instruction requires school districts in Wisconsin to report transactions within specified funds. Each fund is an independent fiscal and accounting entity, requiring its own set of books with special regulations, restrictions, and limitations. Transactions must be made for the purpose that the fund was created. When school finance is discussed at the legislative level, often per pupil revenue limit authority and per pupil categorical aid are talked about as mechanisms for how to provide funding for schools for the upcoming biennium. Both are enrollment-driven funding, however, are two very separate revenue sources that are calculated by the state. First, I will talk about the revenue limit per pupil increase. This is the increase in dollar amount per pupil that is funded by the state. And as you can see, since 2015-16, there was only an increase in 2 years. And in the 21-22 and the 22-23 school years, districts did not receive a favorable increase. In fact, there was no increase in the revenue limit for both years of the biennium budget. What this means is that there was no additional recurring revenue in the revenue limit in the years with $0. Therefore, districts struggled to cover inflationary increases in salary, increases in benefits, and increases in general programming. The per pupil categorical aid is separate from the per pupil revenue limit adjustment and was added in 2012-13 as a mechanism for additional funding to schools. As you can see from the chart, there have been no increases since the 2019-20 school year. Again, this funding is enrollment driven and impacts our overall revenue as a school district, but is separate from our revenue limit authority. Since the implementation of Act 10 in 2011, the ability for school districts to predict and adapt to changes in revenue limit authority has been increasingly difficult. Also unsettling is that the freeze in revenue occurred at a time when the state of Wisconsin had unprecedented budget surpluses available to fund public education. To make ends meet, essentially, Wisconsin state budget decision makers encouraged public schools to use one-time federal dollars and district reserves to cover recurring expenditures. Unfortunately, these dollars are only one-time dollars. Once they are gone, and will result in a fiscal cliff that, if not dealt with in the next state biennium budget, districts will be forced to go to referendum and or make cuts to staffing or programming. As noted in the previous slide, the latest biennium budget does not help Wisconsin's downward trend when we compare our K-12 funding nationally. In 1994, which was the start of revenue limits, Wisconsin ranked 11th in the nation for revenue per pupil. In 2019, we fell to 24th in the ranking. No other state fell so dramatically. This is proof that in a relatively short period of time, the state's financial support for K-12 public education has deteriorated. Making matters worse, the ranking was before the last biennium budget of zero increase in the per pupil revenue limit for 2 years. Looking forward to the 2023-25 biennium, we are facing some financial challenges. This is true for all Wisconsin districts. We all have personally seen the impacts of inflation, and this has also impacted the district finances. We have seen costs of supplies, hired services, utilities, insurance, food, and transportation all increase. As you can imagine, districts in Wisconsin are facing financial challenges and a fiscal cliff. To balance our budget for the 22-23 school year, we are relying heavily on the use of one-time funds. This includes the one-time dollar allocation from Governor Evers, as well as the ESSER $3 for a total of approximately $1.1 million in revenue that we will not receive in the 23-24 budget. Once these funds are depleted at the end of this fiscal year, they are not replenished. Let me repeat that. That is $1.1 million in revenue that we are not getting next year for our recurring and inflating expenditures. Looking beyond this year, there is a lot of uncertainty. In order for school districts to avoid the fiscal cliff that occurs when relying on one-time fund for recurring costs, there needs to be an increase in recurring revenue. That increase needs to be enough to cover the inflation that occurred during the 2021-23 biennium, as well as the inflation that is going to occur in the next biennium. I'd like to briefly expand on an even more historical perspective. From 1998 to 2009, the revenue limit per pupil adjustment was indexed for inflation each year. Under the 2009-11 Budget Act, the inflation adjustment was deleted and the new per pupil adjustments were determined during the biennial budget process. This table provides what the revenue limit per pupil adjustment would have been each year had the prior law indexing, which was tied to inflation, been in place. These figures are outlined in red. And how this compares to the actual funding provided from the revenue limit per pupil adjustment, outlined in green. In the last column in blue, the calculation is the difference between the two. As you can see from the difference, as it relates to inflation, districts have been significantly underfunded since 2009. I'd also like to point out these figures accumulate over time. What does that mean? This chart depicts the state's support for K-12 education versus inflation. The green bars represent the per pupil inflation adjustment that would have been given annually had inflationary adjustments continued. The blue bar represents the actual per pupil adjustment that was provided. As you can see, some years there were no blue bars, which means no increases. And the red bars are by far the most alarming. The red shows the cumulative per pupil difference in the gap between inflation and what was actually provided. To quote an article from the Wisconsin School News, if Wisconsin had simply maintained the previously allowed inflationary adjustment, our public school districts would have received $3,160 more per pupil in the current school year. And that's not factoring in the current high rate of inflation. There are some things that we as a district can do to help face the uncertainty of 2023 and beyond. First and foremost, I want to assure you that as a district, Lake Mills is currently in a healthy financial position with a fund balance of about 29% of total expenditures. Good fiscal planning, managing, and financial practices have put us in a position to build our fund balance. Having a solid financial foundation helps us to be able to navigate during these uncertain times. However, in order to remain financially solvent, and to be able to offer quality programming for our students, we still need to continue to plan for the future by carefully managing the budget and forecasting. Due to the lack of state funding, Lake Mills will have no choice but to use financial reserves in the 2023-24 school year and potentially beyond, pending what the Joint Finance Committee decides on the 2023-25 biennial budget. Even with a favorable outcome, Lake Mills will need to use fund balance for operating expenses in the 23-24 school year. However, the reserves we have built will only go so far. Depleting our fund balance has repercussions, such as adding the need to short-term borrow funds, and could also have a negative impact on our current AA credit rating. Using general fund reserves for ongoing operating expenditures is not only risky, but it is not sustainable. After 2023-2024, like many districts in the state, Lake Mills will need to discuss the option of an operating referendum so that we are able to maintain current class sizes, sustain current levels of educational programming, retain and attract staff, and support the day-to-day operations of the district. There are more and more school districts who rely on operational referendums in order to meet the needs of students. The trend statewide is not if, but when an operational referendum is needed. To give you an idea of the need districts have in the state, in November of 2022, over 40 districts went to referendum with 32 passing, and there are about 50 districts planning an April 2023 operating referendum. In addition, since March of 2020, over 150 school districts have successfully passed operating referendums. As you can see, the trend of operational referendums across the state due to state funding gaps has been significant. A voter-approved operational referendum allows a school district to exceed the levy limits set by state government through each biennial state budget. This outcome provides a very different revenue results per student from one district to the next. The state's decision to stop providing inflationary increases in spendable income directly impacts our ability to follow through on our commitment to the four pillars of our strategic plan: fostering student engagement, developing and retaining effective leadership and staff, connecting school and community, and perhaps the most challenging, aligning resources with our needs. We all want what is best for Wisconsin children, and the more of us who vote and ask our Wisconsin legislators to invest in public education, the better chance we will have of stopping the downward trend of public education funding. Looking beyond 2024, if our Wisconsin public schools continue to be underfunded through the revenue limit or other recurring revenue sources, even more schools across the state, including Lake Mills, will be faced with either the need for an operational referendum or will need to significantly cut programming. Underfunding public education impacts not just those of us with school-aged children and those of us working in the profession. It's an issue that can impact our society as a whole. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video to better understand not only Lake Mills' financial picture, but the financial outlook for all Wisconsin public schools. If you have any questions, I provided my contact information here, and it can also be found on our school district website. Thank you.
So that is the video that we'll be putting up on the district website and passing out to anyone that wants to watch it. I know it's a little lengthy. I was hoping to keep it at 10 minutes, but I felt like a lot of that information was really important to be put out there. I do plan on making more of a condensed version, hopefully to send out to staff, and also try to get in front of staff members face-to-face to kind of answer questions if they have them, but really get our message out, because as Brianna has said, if we're not doing that, then people are making up their own stories potentially. So any comments on the video or questions before I kind of move on to the next point?
I think it was a very good video in terms of trying to keep it simple yet convey a kind of a complicated message. So it was pretty easy to follow. Again, just to restate,
In the session where they were talking about all of this and telling your story, I thought one of the things that was just really black and white eye-opening was the comparison of those districts who were going to referendum, the amounts that they were asking, the people who were, locally close to us versus, further away. I thought that was really really eye-opening too, just to be able to see that, whether that might be helpful as you present it to staff or the community. But yeah, lots of good, important information because it's here.
And to add to that, I plan on working on a handout that just kind of uses all that information that is out there on the DPI website to say, who's going and what they're going for and why they're going, and kind of tidy that up into kind of a handout to present as well. So.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that video. I mean, I've already watched it a couple times, and I've told my coworkers and friends that I'm going to share it with them because it's very well done, very easy to understand. I think the images and the graphs showing the data is really important that people can share. I think the biggest number that got me was if that Inflation Act would have kept going, $3,160 more per pupil. I mean, that's just
It's a big one.
a huge amount of money that our students are missing out on. And then the biggest piece of the pie is wages and benefits. And we have, people are not going into the teaching profession. Teachers who are in the profession are thinking about leaving due to the stressors. And so, the only way we can really balance the situation, unfortunately, is to impact the wages and benefits of our staff. And I just don't think that's fair.
It
So
definitely
I'm
wouldn't
very
match our
worried
strategic plan either, right? Retaining quality educators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just very worried for our students and our staff. There's just no good choices. So no district wants to go to an operational referendum. That's not something anyone wants to do. And voters obviously don't want to have to say yes and pay for that. So I think if you don't want to have an operation, to our constituents, if you don't want to have us go to an operational referendum, I just urge you to contact your legislators and talk to them about the needs of our district. Share this video with our legislators. Anything that you can do to try to persuade and increase funding for our schools, because it is very dire. So thank you for sharing that.
I think, Kirk mentioned equity. I think this is a big equity issue because what we've seen is this has become, a battle between the haves and have-nots, because we've seen the districts that have been able to pass very large operational referendums to support staff needs and things like that, and operations, programs, things that they don't want to have cut. And, then you do see either open enrollment to those communities, or with the teacher shortage, you see teachers going to those communities because there is that stability. There's knowing that your program isn't going to be cut. That there's the support there. And I think it's really hard that this has been placed on the burden of individual communities and taxpayers as far as how you're going to support public education. And not all communities are as wealthy as some of the communities that are passing referenda, and they're just, right, that funding needs to come from the state level instead of being placed directly on the backs of individual communities in the way that it has been.
And then it just got me thinking about the programming too. I was able to attend the Future Freshman Night just as just to learn about the school and all the different programs, and looking at what our technology program has, the different world languages, the FFA. The students got up and spoke about what the FFA program meant to them. And I mean, the programs that we have in our schools are so important to raising well-rounded kids and giving them opportunities. There was a student who had never traveled out of the state of Wisconsin until an FFA trip. And it's amazing what we can do for our kids. And like you mentioned, the equity piece is huge. So I just want all the kids to continue to get the services that they deserve. So, yeah.
Right. Okay, so then I just to continue on a little bit more, this Wednesday at 7 p.m., Governor Evers will be presenting his proposal of the biennial budget. And as I know you're aware, he is fully supportive of public education. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to propose. Some of the highlights that DPI has proposed to the governor are an increase in the per member base by $350 in the 23-24 school year, and then $650 in the 24-25 school year. After that, the proposal is index adjustments to CPI in 25-26 and beyond. So the other highlights are to increase the per pupil payment to $766 this next year and $811 the following year. Currently, that number is at the $742. And another highlight to the proposal is increasing the special education categorical aid, so that reimbursement amount from the current 30% to 45% this next year, and the following year to 60%. So those are some of the things that DPI has proposed to the governor. The governor will take a look, propose that back to joint finance. So he'll do that, like I said, in this week. And then joint finance will deliberate and come up with their budget proposal that has to be passed by both the houses. So that typically happens sometime in June, and then that goes back to the governor, and the governor will then take action, and hopefully we could have a budget by June or July. It has gone as late as September, October, because there hadn't been, a consensus come to. So that's kind of the timeline of what we're looking at. Just look at my notes here. So there's many variables, as we've kind of talked about, that play into how we make up the budget. There's lots of different scenarios and predictions that we can make based on our enrollment, inflation. The voucher program is a big one that impacts Lake Mills. Obviously, the wage and benefit increases, as you know, are a huge part of our budget. So I've provided 3 preliminary budget scenarios for the board, and they're built out of our Baird budget forecast model, which we partner with Baird as our financial advisor. And the scenarios that I provided are kind of a best, middle, and worst case from a revenue standpoint, but I wanted to keep some constant in there and not play with the different variables too much so that you could kind of see that comparison. So what I did for these specific scenarios is I left enrollment flat compared to this year. I put in a 3.5% wage increase and an 8% healthcare increase. And I just use those numbers, and I want to stress that those aren't anything that's been discussed. They're just to be able to put a number in. They're preliminary. There's nothing set in stone, obviously, with those numbers, but I wanted to keep them constant so that you could see what the different revenue options will do to the budget. So in those scenarios, you can see that we result in a deficit that ranges anywhere from between 1.2 million and 2.1 million. Obviously, lots of other things that could happen with that budget, but I just wanted to provide that for you. As I stated in the video, Lake Mills does have a healthy fund balance as we sit currently today. We're at about 29% of our expenditures. However, pending what that revenue outcome is, we may have to make adjustments to our expenditures, and what that looks like is something that we'll all have to talk about. One of the factors that we could consider as we have our discussions about the budget is our fund balance or our reserve fund, which, like I said, is at that 29% right now. Our board policy reads that the board shall strive to maintain an operating reserve of approximately 20% of the district's operating budget. So there's no perfect magic number, but that's something that is in our board policy to remain within that about 20%. So those three scenarios that I provided to you calculate the fund balance to be at 23%, 19%, and 18% respectively, with the best, middle, and worst case scenario. So that is, in a nutshell, kind of where we stand with what's happening. Tanya and I were able to attend a summit this past Friday with, I think there was 51 different school districts that were represented at the summit. It was the first one that had been put on. And there was district administrators there, business officials, and we all kind of broke out into groups kind of with our like-sized districts, and we were able to talk through some of the same things that we're all experiencing. And a lot of the comments that really were a lot of the recurring scenarios, I guess, were that they're surviving, a lot of districts are surviving on those operational referendums. And using a lot of their fund balance this next year. That's a lot of the plans, is one-time money, fund balance, and operating referendums seem to be the theme around how districts are handling this shortfall.
Were any legislators or DPI employees part of that meeting?
No.
Okay.
We were able to so we started with a survey from all the different districts, and they were able to provide us with kind of where their base wages are for teachers specifically. It was, I think, a total of 6 questions, and I just received that data today, so we can look at where we line up with the different districts around the state. I was happy to see that we're pretty in line with a lot of our surrounding areas. They did ask what we're talking about with our boards about raises for next year, and this was a huge range. It ranged from 2% to the full CPI of 8%, all with that caveat of, but we're doing this with an operational referendum. I shouldn't say all, but many said that. So I don't know if you have anything to add from our time there. I thought it was really great to collaborate.
I mean, the
with
districts,
everyone.
there was, like Tasha said, there was, quite a few people there. And I think, part of the goal that they started out with is that, we're all working with taxpayer money. We don't want to necessarily compete with each other, that it's like we're just trying to come to some general consensus of like what range are we in so that, I mean, for budgeting purposes and just moving forward. So I think, like Tasha said, there was a few outliers that are probably going to go to the full 8%, typically a little bit more in Dane County and a lot of the districts that have passed larger operational referenda. But I think a majority of the districts are in the same financial situation that we are. So.
Can I ask a question? So if we would have to go to the short-term borrowing, if our fund balance would drop, is that a process similar to what we've done with Baird before, and you have to take whatever interest rate it is at the time because you need it now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. And, in some of our discussions, if it got to that point, it would be difficult pill to swallow, I guess, to borrow money to pay for recurring expenditures. It's not a wise thing to do.
And there's no way to build the fund balance back. Once you go down that road, you don't come back from that. And it's right, you're spending additional money to borrow money basically to make payroll. Is how that works. And so the board approves a resolution for short-term borrowing at the beginning of the fiscal year. And then on those months where we don't have the funding to bridge that gap in the state funding, then we would borrow for the current month's operating expenses. And right, we don't want to get to that point because it's a waste of money.
Yeah. And my understanding is that sometimes when you're in a position for short-term money, the fund balance serves as a way to bridge sometimes, is that correct? Or meaning you don't have to take out a loan?
Yeah, but I mean, that if it's like for recurring, you don't really want to do that, then you're better off short-term borrowing so
Oh,
that
okay.
you can pay that debt back. 'Cause like I said, we usually, typically, once you take money out of the fund balance, there's very few opportunities to put money back into the fund balance because it would mean that you're ending the school year with a surplus, which doesn't happen that often. I
Right.
mean, that's really the only way money goes back in.
That's probably one of my biggest concerns with, although I recognize we may be in a position to work with the fund balance. But as you say, Tanya, it just doesn't seem like the environment will ever be that we could put money back in. So, should we decide some number, whatever it might be, it's not going to replenish itself. So that's, so it's interesting that some of the districts are kind of looking at a combination of things to work this out. Yeah.
I'm just thinking back to, because you talked about with Act 10, and that kind of got some things rolling. So the message kind of was, we're going to give our school districts tools to be able to kind of make their own choices with that, where then it caused competition between school districts. So now I'm hearing kind of school districts are kind of coming together again. Do you feel like I'm thinking about the equity issue you mentioned, where bigger districts or districts that have that operational referendum have more leverage, where they can have that 8% CPI. I mean, do you feel like there's some camaraderie from that meeting where districts are trying to kind of stay within a certain range to help each other out? Like, is that at the point where we're at? Or do you still feel like we're trying to compete against these bigger districts, and that's really difficult for us?
I mean, us personally, I mean, we don't necessarily pull or lose staff, to Dane County. So we try to look at the districts that that we hire from, and that, and we don't really lose a lot of staff to other districts. I mean, we don't have a high turnover rate. It's hard, because at the same time, I'm saying, looking at, like, we obviously can't fix any type of increases because you still have to go through, many districts have to go through collective bargaining, but it is, I think, just a starting point on, when you look at CPI and you think like, wow, 8%, well, that's pretty high, so what would be probably a more typical raise than always following CPI, because I mean, there was times when CPI was, less than 1% as well, and districts, exceeded that. So.
And then just to add a little bit, I mean, I think that there was a lot of really great discussion around being collaborative and trying to not, what did they call it? Cooperation. We're cooperating, but we're competing at the same time. It's hard to say. I think it's too early to say whether or not. I think that that's going to be more of a collaborative approach with how we're giving raises. I mean, I don't think that is feasible to say that it's going to be exact. I still think that there's districts that are in a position that can do that they can give those bigger raises, and they want to do that for their staff. They do, but I don't think that wages are always what brings somebody to a district. Kind of to go off of what Tanya said, I think a lot of teachers want to be here because of many other reasons. So I think we can really, take those points of pride as well and drive that home too, so.
Tasha, is the scenario that once we know what the budget looks like, once we have all the numbers from the state, we're into the next school year at that point. And if there was an approach of looking at the fund balance or thinking about a referendum, would those from the fund balance, would that be like what would be the timing if we needed something, if we decided for help from the fund balance, what would be the typical timing on that? Because you wouldn't know your budget until maybe, it could be October. And you want to prevent a shortfall at the end of the school year, right? So we would have that amount, somewhere in there would be the time, right? And-
Right.
And with the fund balance piece, is there any restrictions on timing?
Not necessarily. I mean, we have that money, you know, it's fluid, so it changes from day to day with every transaction that we make. But that money is there. So that's kind of where these discussions are now, that we know that next year we'll be able to rely on fund balance to a certain point, but we have to, you know, look at what that's going to do to that fund balance percentage. How low do we think that we can go before we're in a different position? And what kind, and that bases the decisions that we're making now on you know, healthcare costs and wage increases, and building these scenarios and having these conversations early on so that we can say, here are all the different variables. And as we continue to get more information, such as the budget, we can make those decisions so that we know that we have enough in our fund balance to be able to, you know, stay where we need to pay the bills, so to speak.
Sure.
Does that help?
Well, I think regardless, I mean, we can use fund balance for 1 year, you know, in an amount as great as that. I mean, $1 million to $2 million deficit is a large one. But I think this discussion needs to be rolled into our community advisory committee, because we are already looking at, you know, possibly going to referendum in April of '24. And, you know, originally our operational referendum was to support the building, the new building that we were hoping to construct. But I think a larger conversation has to happen, because we're going to continue to see these deficits moving forward. As you've seen, you know, it's when the increases from the state are not base building increases every year, it's just basically filling the gaps. So you're not able to build on any type of inflationary increases. So I think there has to be probably a broader community conversation about the budget.
And if we were looking at a referendum as part of the solution, would the timing of that be, you were saying possibly, I mean, it would have to be in 2024.
Right,
Correct,
April,
April.
right.
April? Okay.
Not for, excuse me, not for discussion, or you don't have to have the answers tonight, but after staff and wages, what is the next biggest expense? I mean, to look at other ways to possibly address the issue. And then also, I saw your projections had 0 pupil increase. That's going to factor into whatever we do as far as the increase as far as a building referendum, as well as
Yes.
the
Yes.
operational.
So obviously more pupils, that revenue would go up, and less the opposite, so.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked, I mean, health insurance costs are by far probably one of our biggest expenses, and we have a committee looking at that already. We've talked about, even if we wanted to make reductions in staff, we have no excess staff. I mean, we're about as lean as you can get. You know, you can't cut bus drivers, you can't cut food service. We don't have an excess of teachers. We really are, I would say, in my opinion, missing some positions that we probably should have in the district that we've been doing without. So, you know, we're trying to get proactive. It's not going to help immediately, but like, you know, looking into solar to try to cut utility costs, you know, things like that. So we are looking out into the future about how can we reduce any other expenditures, but nothing adds up to quite as large of amount as what we're looking at.
And the next largest kind of chunk of that pie, right, is our purchase services, which is made up of a lot of different things. And then beyond that would be our transfer to Fund 27, so that special ed piece, which we don't have much control, if any, over that, so.
Yeah. All right, any other questions?
So just the other things, it could be increased student fees, it could be not getting a new curriculum that we need, or like professional development. It's kind of all those little things that.
It could. If you remember back to the revenue pie, there was, you know, 2 little slices, and then you could probably see some little tiny slivers in there, and those little slivers are the fees and
Okay.
the tiny things. So
Drop in the bucket there.
I don't foresee it moving the needle much, but we can certainly, it could be part of discussions and the message as well.
I think I just continue to circle back to our strategic plan and our mission statement, preparing all of today's students for tomorrow's opportunities. And I think when we actually cut from the pieces that are huge in the pie, then we're taking away from our mission statement and our strategic plan. So I think, as outside of the box thinking as we can get, we really have to push for the outside of our, taxpayers' pockets. It has to come from the state, like we've been saying. So yes, the support we can get from them is crucial.
Okay, moving on to Dr. Olson's presentation.
Yeah, I just have a quick 1 minute, just a reminder that coming off of what we just talked about, that the school board days at the Capitol is Wednesday, March 22nd, so it's an excellent opportunity for board members to be able to go in and meet with their legislators at the Capitol and continue to advocate for great public schools. So if you are interested in going, there is a registration, so please contact Megan and have her sign you up. I do plan on going.
All right. Any questions? All right, the next thing is the consent agenda. And, I'm sorry, comments. Are there any people to comment, registered to comment?
No.
All right. Now, moving on to the consent agenda. This month's consent agenda includes the approval of the following: January 9th regular meeting minutes, January's Facility and Finance Personnel Committee proceedings, February Board of Education workshop proceedings, January Treasurer's Report and vouchers and invoices, the Personnel Report, September 2023 Fine Arts Weekend Field Trip, March 2024 New York Weekend Field Trip, and June 2024 8th grade Washington, D.C. field trip. Is there any items that people would like to pull out to separately discuss? All right, hearing none, do I have a motion?
I'll move the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second the motion.
All right, any further discussion? All right, on the vote, we will have a roll call.
Ken Imers,
Aye.
Andrea Graham. Aye. Kirk Lund,
Aye.
Amy Litcher,
Aye.
Brianna Besselich.
Aye.
Okay, moving on to action items. The first one is the Howick Associates contract for the Community Advisory Committee.
Right, so Drew was able to provide a contract this morning, and so based on his contract will be based on how many work sessions he facilitates with the community. Right now, I'm estimating that it'll be about 10 workshop sessions. So he hasn't firmed that up, so he's charging us per session, and then also mileage to get here, and then also a separate fee for the planning that he does us ahead of time to create the agendas. So I'm estimating the cost of the facilitator to be between $10,000, $12,000. But the first meeting that we were planning on having him facilitate, since we have this as an agenda item, I know it's been hard to find a date, and we were trying to get this in February since he will be out of the state in March. And we could come up with a plan B if that doesn't work. So I'm just kind of wondering, do you want me to find a date where all 5 of you can attend? We could try to facilitate that with his partner Debbie, who has some different availability. I think Drew wanted to come in himself to facilitate that. So I know, Brianna, there was the February 22nd date that wouldn't work for you. And he's got some daytime dates, and I think February 28th was a date that didn't work because I know we have parent-teacher conferences and things like that as well. And I think if we do more of a daytime workshop, then Andrea, we won't have you in attendance. So I guess let me know what you want me to do with trying to find a date.
Is everyone else available during the day? Because I do trust your judgment and
I was going to say the same thing.
expertise.
I have some daytime obligations too, sometimes with the other hats that I wear, but I also trust your judgment if you can the 4 of you can attend those, to not mess the schedule and do what works best for all.
I feel like, we're not starting this from scratch. We just spent the last year and a half in the middle of referendum planning, and I know you brought up the strategic planning, our strategic plan, and there's I think some nice starter language in there. I don't see this taking the 2 or 2.5 hours that he suggested it might take. I'm thinking we should be able to get this done fairly quickly.
Right, then if no one cares, I mean, if a majority, I shouldn't say no one cares.
If I'm the only one on the 22nd, I would say stick with that date.
Okay, and, I mean, we can get some feedback from you ahead of time as well. I mean, if there's any specific points that you're like, I want to make sure I get this in or that in, you and I can talk ahead of time too and just make sure that we don't miss out on anything, but I'm sure Drew will do a nice job facilitating that. So, okay, so I'll move ahead with the February 22nd date at 3:45 and.
All right, but then we also need a proposed motion to approve the contract, so.
Can I ask a question before I move into that? With his timeline, when he was talking about the who and listing the staff, is that like legit with the staff in our building? Or is he calling staff like that community group?
So I know when they're looking at, I mean, they'll put out an all-call to the community, and we definitely want to have staff representation, but I think what he's going to do is look to make sure that when you say staff, it's teachers, custodians, cooks, a cross-section of staff, so that we're not too heavy on just, elementary teachers or something like that. So I think he's going to be looking very closely even as far as the community representation as well, that there's just really different groups are represented, people without kids, senior citizens, people that are connected in with, we talk about like the rec department, people that are connected in on the city side of things.
So when he's mentioning staff there, using that word staff, he's meaning the committee.
Yeah, you talking about in his contract or?
No, it's on the Lake Mills Community Advisory Committee proposed timeline PDF.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I think what he's talking about is Megan and me. When he's talking about communication out, so I think that's a little bit more focused on that. The district staff will be taking care of some of that communication externally and internally. So, sorry, I should have opened up the other document.
Are there any other questions about the contract before I guess we receive a motion to approve? All right, hearing none. Can I have a motion?
I'll move the board approve the contract with Howick Associates to create a community advisory committee for facility planning as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'd have a roll call vote on the motion.
Brianna Beselick,
Aye.
Ken Imers,
Aye.
Andrea Graham,
Aye.
Kirk Lund,
Aye.
Amy Litcher.
Aye. Okay, the next one is the Jedi Consortium Agreement. The board is being asked to approve the annual consortium agreement with the Jedi Virtual School that's housed at Marshall School District, is that?
They're the fiscal agent for Jedi, I shouldn't say that, fiscal agents, ESA2's fiscal agent. They are the school of record, but these are our, majority are our singleton classes that students are taking if we don't offer the class at the high school level.
And this is approved annually?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll move the board approve the Jedi Consortium Agreement as presented.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion, questions? Hearing none, I will ask for a roll call vote.
Ken Imers,
Aye.
Andrea Graham,
Aye.
Kirk Lund,
Aye.
Amy Litcher.
Aye.
Brianna Beselick.
Aye.
All right, moving on, the summer school wages. If you want to provide a little background?
Sure. So I put together some numbers. I know last time we talked about this, we were kind of hemming and hawing about a few of the things here. So I used last year as kind of a base to create some comparisons between the different wages. Previous to COVID, we paid $25 an hour to our teachers, and this past year, we paid $35 an hour. And this was presented as a one-time increase due to having the ESSER dollars to kind of incentivize and encourage teachers to come and boost our summer school program. So we had talked about what we should do now going back to this current upcoming year for summer school. So there is some comparable wages in there from surrounding districts, and their wages range from anywhere between $23 an hour up to $36.65, with the average being between $27 and $28 an hour. So if we look at the number of hours that we had just last year, with every $5 pay increment that we add or subtract from that, it equates to approximately $30,000 in wages and then FICA and Social Security. So, and again, that's with last year's numbers. So that's what they're programming last year, the amount of teachers we had and that such. So that would change with that. So the suggestion that I'm making is that we meet kind of in the middle, not going back to the full $25 an hour, but meet at that middle ground of $30 an hour for teachers. And then in terms of paraeducators, we paid them $20 an hour, and that also was a bump in pay as an incentive last year to boost the program and incentivize them. Prior to that, they were paid what their hourly wage was in the regular school year. And after some further discussions, we thought that it might be best to kind of pay everyone on a level playing field at $15 an hour for the paraeducators. And then following that same practice that we do during the regular school year is to add that $1 an hour if they're working one-on-one with a special education student.
Have we gotten commitments from staff yet to teach summer school? Has that call been put out?
I don't believe we've got full commitments. I think we have interest out there. I think a lot of people are kind of waiting for this piece before they make those
Yeah, I mean, has there been any casual conversations? Anyone coming to you asking
Aaron's
about
been
pay?
working on that quite a bit and got the summer school structure out. So again, I think like Tasha said, like I think they're kind of waiting to confirm that because we put out information that we were talking about the salaries. I mean, if you remember last year, we did see a lot of commitment from our staff to teach summer school, which helps summer school run a lot better when it's our own district staff versus trying to hire people with a teaching license from outside of the district. So that it was an incentive last year with the pay. But I'm sure once we get going, usually we gotta talk to people individually and, talk people into teaching summer school. So a lot of times that all gets firmed up here, in May, so.
So can I clarify, does your second paragraph about the $5 pay increment, what it equates to? Mm-hmm. So you took that $25 an hour, so if we were to consider that 30, we would be looking at that 30,000 wage increase benefit?
Correct.
Okay.
Or the other way, where if we, instead of 35, we did 30, it would be a decrease from the wages paid last year.
Okay.
And just to clarify, this particular choice would be going forward, right? Not like a one-time thing. This would be-
Correct.
This is different from last year.
Correct. Thank you for that. That was a good question.
I appreciate the reaching out to all the neighboring school districts to get the amounts there. Just for future reference, maybe something we can look at. I do like the ones that have external candidates at a certain rate, and then internal employees can move up to a max of, like, some of them have 35. If their regular pay, per hour is above a certain amount. So I do like being able to pay those teachers who have more experience and just a higher hourly rate.
And we
more.
did
So-
do that last year.
Okay.
We had, I believe it was 30 and 35. However, we had so few outside teachers come in that I think everyone was paid at that 35. I think we had 2, 3 maybe. But that is something that we have done in the past. So we could certainly look at that for this coming year as well.
And just to try and give this context, when we did the 35 an hour, there was some concern about getting enough teachers at that point for summer school, and I think we're still in that. I mean, I think we'd find ourselves in that situation if we don't keep up, whatever that number is. So this is more of a, this wasn't I mean, there was a relationship to the pandemic and all the things that went on, but really this is addressing shortage of teachers, especially during the summer.
Right.
I also liked, Andrea, like you said too, with the opportunity to entice our own people, which is, I thought was, kind of how we had done it before, which I liked, and maybe we won't have that problem, but something to maybe consider or come back to if we find that that is the case, that we're having to pull from outside sources. It does really help, like you said, to have internal candidates really teaching and who already know our students. Then could we bring it back for discussion next year to talk about?
So is there a motion, whether it's as presented or a different one?
I think we're looking for a motion for a number. Is that it?
The proposed amount is $30 per hour for teachers,
Oh, okay.
$15 per hour for paraeducators for regular education, and $16 per hour of special education students.
You could roll that into the motion specifically.
So if I said I move the board to approve the summer school wages as presented as discussed
Yes.
right there. So that's it. I'll move to do that.
Second.
I'll move to the board approve the summer school wages as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussions or?
I'm still struggling a little bit with I agree, like the need is still there. We're looking at this fiscal cliff where we're probably going to have to,
Yeah.
teachers are going to have to take concessions on, it's just really hard to say, you were worth $35 last summer, but now so I don't know. I'm just still struggling. I don't know how. And then when I look at our EAs, $15 an hour, it's like, could we get to 18? I don't know. Anyone else?
I agree. Our teachers are worth more than they get all the time.
I know.
But I think as I looked at the list of compared schools, it went back to some of those conversations we had before where unfortunately they're in districts who have already large operating referendums, and so they have the extra money to then give to those teachers.
Because like you said, the 35 was from the ESSER
Surplus.
mainly.
Yes.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's
All right, it's been moved and seconded, and if there's no other discussions, I will call for a roll call vote.
Andrea Graham,
I'm going to say no.
Kirk Lund,
Aye.
Amy Litcher,
Aye.
Brianna Beselick,
Aye.
Ken Imers.
Aye.
All right, it's been it's been passed 4-1. Moving on, 4K kindergarten structure. We are proposing to move to a 5-day 4K structure.
Half day too. I know, it was, so I did provide some information late that I was able to locate on the DPI website, which I thought was really interesting. So statewide data, 126 districts offer a 5-day per week, half-day program. And then there's 120 districts that offer a 5-day, full-day program. I was amazed that 120 districts fund a full-day, 5-day program, because as a reminder, in Wisconsin, we're only funded for a half-day program. We're at 0.6 with the outreach. 106 districts offer a 4-day, half-day program. That's where we're at right now. And then 70 districts offer a 2 or 3 day a week program, but those are also full-day programs. So you can kind of start, see like things are starting to move forward with 4K, and we've talked about that, even at the state level. There's been some discussion about funding a full day, 5-day a week 4K program. So, at the very least, we're asking to move our 4-day, half-day program to a full, or a 5-day, half-day program. Part of that is just, I think, a little bit better continuity. It also, I think, provides a better service for parents as well, instead of having to find full-day childcare on Fridays. So at the very least, I guess, staying in line with what a majority of the school districts are already offering across the state. So what that means is, we'll have a few fewer minutes during the actual school day, since we are moving to 5 days a week. Our 4K teachers already do quite a bit of outreach, so I would expect that to continue. That looks different in every district you are in, but there is a lot of great servicing and communication with our 4K teachers. I think the biggest thing we are, just waiting on is enrollment numbers, because we had talked about, that possible fifth section, and I know we're waiting for the Methodist Church group to meet, because they have their own spacing constraints and are doing a lot of programming at the church, so we're not quite sure if they would be able to accommodate a 5-day-a-week program. And so I think our default is, if we had to offer one section that was still a 4-day, half-day program, we probably could make that available to parents that would still want to choose that. I don't think that's so out of the ordinary either. I've done that in my previous district, where we had several 5-day options, and we also had some 4-day options, and some parents choose the 4-day option and like that flexibility. So I know once we hear back from the Methodist Church on what works best in their schedule, we can move forward, and so we won't have any, we have to wait for enrollment to come in to see where our numbers are at as well. But so kind of like everything's hinging on everything else at this point. I just want to say we did meet with quite a few members of the Methodist Church, and they have been fabulous partners through all of this, and have been so very accommodating in everything that they do, that we do appreciate their support here over the past few years. And they do run a tremendous 3K program as well, so.
So can I ask, if we wouldn't need that fifth section then of 4K, would we potentially not need the contract with the Methodist Church?
Potentially. So I think, that's why I think we still have to continue some discussions, because I think there are other options. We still would like to, offer some wraparound programming. We're still, looking into space, for some of that. And so there's just a lot of moving parts quite yet until all those different pieces firm up. And enrollment is really the biggest piece. I'm hoping we need that fifth section. We'd have to really, I think, we'd have to lose,
I think we need a
students.
fifth section now.
Right,
with
I know,
the
we
numbers
need that
have.
fifth section right now, so.
And then what does planning time look like for the staff? Because normally Friday would be the planning, like, we won't have to increase specials allocation, like, they won't go to specials, like PE.
No, so they have a larger amount of time from the dismissal of the morning section until the arrival of the second section. So the teachers would have lunch and planning time in between that. Right now, they have absolutely no time during the day, which is why all of their plan time is on Friday.
Are both, I think there's 2 4K teachers, are both of them, and well as Wendy and the elementary school staff, okay with going to 5-day?
Yeah, Wendy and
Okay.
Aaron have been meeting with the staff over there and bringing them along.
And then would it be different transportation for the 4K versus the 4-day versus the 5-day? Would the 4-day be a different time for busing versus?
We haven't really thought that far ahead.
I
I
think-
think potentially. I don't know, Wendy, if you want to come up to the mic and add anything.
Right now, we're planning on it coinciding with the beginning and the end of the day, for the morning and afternoon. So it's just the mid time. And I know Tanya had already talked to our transportation director, making sure that would work for their needs as well.
Okay. Sounds good.
Is the constraint at the possible constraint at the Methodist Church, is that more around 5 days or just volume each day? Do you know what I'm saying? Is it
think-
the 5 day?
I think what when we met with them, and Brianna, you can add this, they've got a lot of programming going on. So I mean, there's times that they need the church area where our kids are in on Fridays for either meetings or, funerals or set up for any other
Okay.
types of things. When we did meet with them on a Friday, they had, all the furniture was moved out because they were getting ready for a different event. So I think that's one of the bigger hurdles is, they're getting ready for either Friday afternoon or weekend activities. So there's a lot of stuff to move out of the way, and I know you're using every square inch of your church area as well, so.
So in the context of a motion here to approve a 5 day, but kind of the outstanding question would be, how's that going to play out, right? From a standpoint of where they could be in classrooms.
Right, and that's why I wrote the motion with the option of a 4-day session if needed. So I think just being able to grant some flexibility that as we start seeing enrollment numbers come in, as we continue to work with the Methodist Church, that it, at least permission to move forward with a 5-day option at the elementary site, I think is really what we're seeking. But I see several more meetings with the church, and
see.
especially as enrollment numbers start coming in.
Okay.
Because, we get staffing to discuss and things like that as well.
And I know with the whole referendum conversation, like, we don't have space. So do you feel like we can maneuver adequately to find space for them?
Yes, we did look at our needs and where everyone is and have a solution that we think would work well to bring the 4K class over to the elementary. But at this time would really need that 5th section to be at the church in either a 4 or 5 day capacity, depending on what the church would allow. And as Tanya mentioned earlier, we're also interested in the possibility of seeing if the church would be willing to let us use space there for a possible wraparound care as well.
All right, is there any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, I will ask for a motion.
I'll move the board approve a 5-day 4-year-old kindergarten structure as presented.
With the, continue on.
Oh,
With the option of a 4-day session.
okay, I'll move the board approve a 5-day 4-year-old kindergarten structure as presented with the option of a 4-day session if needed. I have a slightly
I'll second.
Yeah, I amended that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussions or questions additionally?
I was just gonna say, from the kiddo standpoint too, I had multiple kids who were like, what? My brother gets to go to school today and I don't. So I think we'll have a lot of happy 4K kiddos to be able to go on Friday too.
Yeah.
I would just add too, the need is there, like St. Paul is looking at adding an early childhood center in fall of 2024, possibly, depending on the funding. So with that, I think the aftercare sounds like a great plan as well for our families, so.
Absolutely. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Can I have a roll call vote?
Kirk Lund,
Aye.
Amy Litcher,
Aye.
Brianna Beselick,
Aye.
Ken Imers,
Aye.
Andrea Graham.
Aye.
All right. The next is the Alternative Education Program Agreement with Johnson Creek School District. And just the information in the board docs, longstanding partnership with Johnson Creek School District in offering educational services to our at-risk students needing a different learning environment. And this year, the alternative program is hosted by Lake Mills Area School District at the high school, and the board is being asked to approve the agreement between the two districts in order to continue, for Johnson Creek to send students here.
Yeah, they have currently one student that they would like to send here, that, which is why we're not approving this agreement until now. So they would like that student to finish out the year here. They still remain a Johnson Creek student, but we educate them. So I apologize for, I think I mentioned to one of you that if we go forward with this contract next year, I will clean this up. But Johnson Creek School Board had already approved it before I was able to get in there and work on some things, so.
All right, any questions? And Johnson Creek is providing the transportation for their.
Correct, yep.
I'll move the board approve the alternative education program agreement with the Johnson Creek School District as presented.
I'll second the motion.
Any further discussion? If not, I will ask for a roll call vote.
Amy Litcher,
Aye.
Brianna Beselick,
Aye.
Ken Imers,
Aye.
Andrea Graham,
Aye.
Kirk Lund.
Aye.
All right, on to the part where I'm pleasantly surprised always, always, always at the gifts that the community makes to the school district, and this is of the approval of those.
I'll move that the board accept the following gifts, and as always, thanking our generous donors for their continued support within our district so that our students continue to have those amazing programs here in Lake Mills. So the first one is a $100 donation to the Lake Mills High School's Pop Strings and Lake Mills High School Show Choir from the legendary Lake Mills, a Chamber Main Street organization. The second is a $300 donation to the Lake Mills Rec Department's youth basketball program from the Lake Mills Optimists. And the third tonight is a $5,414.95 donation to the Lake Mills Rec Department disc golf course for upgrades from the Bank of Lake Mills.
Is there a second?
Second.
Excuse me. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? May I have a roll call vote?
Brianna Beselick,
Aye.
Ken Imers,
Aye.
Andrea Graham,
Aye.
Kirk Lund,
Aye.
and Amy Litcher.
Aye. All right, future agenda items.
We'll be looking at the early college credit requests and looking at a renewal of our contract for nursing services with Fort Healthcare. And we'll be updating the board each month on the budget and then, also 4K numbers and how we see enrollment projecting out for next year.
Okay. Any other items to be put on the future agenda? All right, then.
I'll move the board adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, parentheses 1, parentheses C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically parentheses A, district administrator's evaluation, B, high school assistant principal contract, C, approval of executive session minutes.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll have a roll call vote on the motion.
Andrea Graham,
Aye.
Kirk Lund,
Aye.
Amy Litcher,
Aye.
Brianna Beselick,
Aye.
Ken Imers.
Aye.
It's been moved, and we are now in closed session. So.